The sun peeked through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the small kitchen. Valerie moved her hands quickly, working quietly as she prepared breakfast. The aroma of scrambled eggs and toast filled the air. She glanced at the clock, feeling the familiar pressure of the morning routine. Andrew, Lisa, Emily, breakfast is ready, Valerie called out, her voice carrying a mix of urgency and affection, and Andrew, the youngest at 6, entered the kitchen first, his hair a disheveled mess. Mom, can I have extra cheese on my eggs? Sure, boy, Valerie replied, ruffling her hair before scooping some more cheese onto her plate. Lisa followed suit, dressed up and already holding a book. Emily, the middle child at 7, followed behind, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Ben, her husband, appeared at her side, a calm presence amidst the chaos of the morning. He greeted everyone, kissing Valerie on the cheek. He moved to help the children with their plates, his expert hands pouring orange juice and cutting fruit. Ben, do you have it all for your trip? Valerie asked, her voice tinged with a hint of concern that she tried to mask. Yes, almost finished packing, he replied, his tone reassuring. I'll be back before you know it. The children were eating with the enthusiasm of young people chatting about their plans for the day. Valerie listened with half attention, her mind partly on the tasks ahead. As the breakfast rush subsided, Ben retreated to the bedroom to finish packing. Valerie continued to lean against the doorframe as she watched him fold her shirts and put them in the suitcase. Are you sure you have everything? She asked again, her voice softer this time. Ben looked up, meeting her eyes. Valerie, I'll be fine. It's just a quick conference. I'll be back before you know. He zipped up the suitcase and walked over to her, pulling her into a hug. Don't worry so much. Valerie nodded, forcing a smile. I know, she let out a sigh, burying her face in his shoulder for a moment. Hey, I'll call you every day, Ben said, kissing the top of her head. We'll get through this week like we always do. The kids gathered at the door, ready to say goodbye. Ben knelt down, hugging each of them. It'll be good for Mommy, okay? I'll bring you all something special when I get back. Andrew clung to Ben's leg. Promise you'll be back soon, promise, Ben said, giving him one last squeeze before he stood up, picked up his bag, and walked to the door. Valerie and the children following with a final wave. He was gone. The house became quieter after he left, the morning hustle and bustle fading into a more subdued routine. Valerie busied herself with clearing up the breakfast dishes, her mind wandering. She looked at the calendar, counting down the days until Ben's arrival. Back, the day passed in a blur of activity. Valerie dropped the children off at school, went to work, and then picked them up again. Dinner was simpler case without Ben, but they managed. When night fell, she put each child to bed, reading stories to them until they fell asleep. Late that night, while she was tidying in the living room, the phone rang. Valerie's heart skipped a beat. It was unusual for someone to call that. She picked up the phone, her hand shaking slightly. Mrs. Lawson, a voice on the other end, said, "Yes, it is," Valerie replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding. "This is Officer Mitchell from the New York Police Department. I'm afraid there's been an accident involving your..." Valerie's husband's world seemed tilted. The phone slipped from her hands. Falling to the floor, she fell to her knees, struggling to breathe. The officer's voice remained muffled and distant, but she couldn't make out what words. Moments later, she forced herself to pick up the phone again. "What happened?" she managed to ask in a voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your husband was in a car accident. He couldn't." The words echoed in her mind in understandable. She felt a numbness spread through her body. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be happening." The rest of the conversation passed in a haze. Details were given, arrangements were discussed, but Valerie barely heard anything. When she finally hung up, she sat there in silence, her mind struggling to process the news. The days after Ben's funeral were a blur to Valerie. The house felt empty, in every corner echoing with memories of him. The children tried to maintain a semblance of normality, but their laughter was quieter, their footsteps slower. Valerie could see the emptiness in their eyes, reflecting her. Their own morning started earlier. Now the alarm rang, breaking the pre-dawn silence. And Valerie forced herself out of bed. She moved through the house like a shadow, mechanically preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee used to be a sign of a shared moment with Ben, but now it was just a bitter reminder of his absence. "Mom, where's my backpack?" Andrew, the voice, pulled her from her thoughts in the living room chair. "Honey," Valerie replied, trying to muster a smile. Lisa and Emily sat at the table eating their cereal in silence. Valerie glanced at the clock, feeling the familiar morning rush. She packed their snacks, checked their homework, and the job of getting them out the door was a welcome distraction, but the exhaustion weighed heavily on her. She arrived at the store greeting her colleagues with a wave to her desk. She dove into numbers and spreadsheets, but her mind often returned to Ben, his laughter, his touch, his presence. It all seemed they were drifting further and further apart with each passing day. The nights were the hardest. Valerie would come home, cook dinner, help the kids with their homework, and put them to bed. The house would be quiet, and she would sit at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, and the numbers blurred as she looked at them, a worrying gnawing at her chest. One night, as she was sorting through a pile of medical bills, there was a knock on the door. Mrs. Thompson, her elderly neighbor, was there holding a casserole dish. "I thought you could use a hot meal," Mrs. Thompson said with a gentle smile. Valerie took the plate, her throat tightened. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. You didn't need this nonsense, honey. We are all here for you if you need it. Anything, let me know." After Mrs. Thompson leaves, Valerie set the casserole dish on the counter, her eyes filled with tears. The kindness was overwhelming, but it also made her feel more keenly Ben's absence. He would know exactly how to handle it, how to comfort her. She felt a pang of guilt for feeling grateful and yet incredibly alone. The other night, as Valerie was mowing the lawn, Mr. Wilson, across the way, the street, passed overhead. "Hey, Valerie, let me take over," he said, gesturing toward the lawnmower. "No, Mr. Wilson, I can handle it," Valerie replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I insist you have enough on your plate. Let me help," he said in a firm but gentle tone. Reluctantly, Valerie handed over the lawnmower, watching as Mr. Wilson efficiently took over the task. She was in feeling a mixture of gratitude and helplessness. She was used to handling things on her own, but the weight of it all was getting very late at night. After the kids slept, Valerie would sit alone at the kitchen table. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock. She spread out the bills, calculating and recalculating, trying to make ends meet. The numbers never seemed to add up. The financial pressure was suffocating. She found herself staring at a photograph of Ben that had been taken during a family picnic. Arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera, she traced his face, with her finger, a tear running down her cheek. "I miss you, Ben," she whispered in the empty room. The days blurred into weeks, and tiredness became a constant companion. Valerie soldiered on, driven by the need to provide for her children, but every night as she counted the bills and worried about the future, she felt the heavy burden of her absence. Despite the support of her neighbors, Valerie felt an intense pride in wanting to handle things on her own. She appreciated the casseroles and the offers of help, but she wanted to prove to herself that she could handle what she had, be strong for her children, even if it meant falling apart in the solitude of the night. The world outside continued as usual, but for Valerie it seemed like it was time. It had stopped. Each day was a battle against the financial memories. The tension and loneliness was overwhelming, yet in those quiet moments, desperately, she found a glimmer of determination. She would survive this. Her children, and for her the storm had come, but she was still standing ready to face whatever came next. The shadows of the evening were lengthening as Valerie ran down the street, holding her coat tightly around her. The cold wind bit her cheeks, and she quickened her pace, looking at the clock. It was getting late, and the children would be wondering where she was. She needed to get home with the milk for Andrew. The streets were quieter now, the usual hustle and bustle of the day replaced by an eerie stillness. Valerie's footsteps echoed on the sidewalk, a reminder of how alone she was. She turned a corner, eyes darting to the small, still-lit grocery store at the end of the block. Relief washed over her. She wasn't too late. When she reached the entrance, she felt a pang of unease. Someone was watching her. Valerie glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing. She shook her head, scolding herself for being paranoid. Still, her heart raced as she ran inside, grabbed a carton of milk, and walked over to the cashier. Gave her a tired smile as he rang up her purchase. "Busy night?" he asked. "Just trying to get home," Valerie replied, forcing a smile. She paid quickly and stepped back out of the uncomfortable feeling returning. The sky was now a deep blue, the last light of day fading into night. Valerie walked quickly, her senses on high alert. The feeling of being watched hadn't left her. She looked back again, and this time she saw 3 figures moving from the shadows, their steps matching hers. Her pulse raced, and she picked up her pace, clutching the milk tightly as the figures approached. Valerie's breath came in short gasps. She turned another corner, expecting to find a busier street or a brightly lit store, but the road was deserted. Panic set in. She could hear the men's footsteps now too close for comfort. "Hey lady, I got a minute," one of them shouted, his voice dripping with menace. Valerie didn't answer. She broke into a run, her heart pounding in her chest. The men's laughter echoed behind. Her footsteps gaining, she turned another corner and tripped on the milk. Slipping from her hands and splattering on the pavement, she looked up. In fear, out of nowhere a figure stepped into her path, tall and imposing. The man's presence was commanding. "Leave her alone," he barked, his voice a low growl. The men skidded to a stop, his bravado mind wavering. His own old business. One of them scoffed. "I said leave her alone," the stranger repeated, stepping forward, the streetlight illuminating his features, revealing a rough face marked by hard. Sometimes his eyes, however, were sharp and determined. The men hesitated to exchange nervous glances. "Come on, let's go from here," one muttered. At that, they turned and fled back into the shadows. Valerie stood there trembling. The stranger turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked her, voice softer now. She nodded, unable to speak at first. "Thank you," she finally managed, voice shaky. "I don't know." Gregory shifted uncomfortably, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his rough hands clasped nervously in front of him. "Look," he began, his voice hoarse but sincere, "I know this isn't any of my business, but I've noticed you've been struggling. If you need help with the kids, I can give you a hand." Valerie's first reaction was surprise, followed by instinctive caution. Her eyes quickly scanned the hallway where her children were playing, and then back to Gregory. She knew she was in desperate need of help, but could she trust him? I don't know," she mumbled, crossing her arms defensively. "We barely know each other." Gregory nodded, his eyes showing genuine understanding. "I understand. It's a lot to ask," he admitted, "but I just want to help. You don't have to decide right now." Valerie watched him closely. There was a sincerity in his gaze that she rarely saw in others, and it gave her pause. She sighed deeply, feeling the weight of exhaustion that had been pressing down on her for days. "Okay," she said, barely above a whisper. "You can help tonight. But only tonight." A smile of relief crossed Gregory's face. "Thank you, Valerie. I promise I won't let you down." As the evening wore on, Valerie's feelings of apprehension slowly mixed with an unexpected sense of relief. Gregory joined the children in the living room, and soon his demeanor changed to one of light-hearted amusement. He made exaggerated faces that left Andrew laughing uncontrollably, while Lisa, more reserved, watched everything with a cautious smile. Emily, on the other hand, stood next to Valerie, curious but still clinging to her mother. "Can you do that?" Gregory asked, twisting his face into a ridiculously funny expression. Andrew, trying to imitate him, laughed out loud as he tried to contort his little face. "Like this?" he asked, his attempt adorably clumsy. "Exactly." Gregory cheered enthusiastically, extending his hand for a high five, which Andrew promptly returned with a happy laugh. Valerie, still watching from the doorway with her arms crossed, felt mixed feelings. It was comforting to see Gregory getting along so well with the children, something she couldn't ignore. He seemed to have a natural way with them, managing to elicit laughter with ease. However, she couldn't completely shake the unease and doubt. Could she really trust him? Valerie's heart was torn between gratitude for his help and the caution that experience had taught her. As the evening wore on, she realized that although Gregory had been incredibly kind and helpful, the feeling of uncertainty still lingered. The help was welcome, especially with the weight she was carrying alone, but opening herself up to trusting someone else was something that would take time. Andrew began to grow restless, his cries filling Gregory's small apartment. Gregory's calm expression, in contrast to his rugged exterior, revealed an unexpectedly soft side. He picked the boy up in his arms and began to rock him gently, humming a low, soothing tune. Andrew's cries gradually subsided until he finally rested his head on Gregory's shoulder, now at peace. "You're really good at this," Valerie commented, unable to hide her surprise at Gregory's ability to soothe her son. Gregory shrugged, a faint smile playing on his lips. Kids just need a little patience and affection, he replied simply. Later, as the evening wore on and it was time to put the children to bed, Gregory offered to read them a story. Andrew, Emily, and Lisa gathered around him, their little faces full of anticipation and joy. With a firm voice and a welcoming intonation, Gregory selected a book from the shelf and began to narrate. The children listened intently, their eyes fascinated, their expressions softening as the story unfolded. Valerie, who had been watching from a distance, leaning against the doorframe, felt her heart sink. She had been carrying the burden of raising her children alone for so long, and seeing Gregory interacting so well with them and providing them with a sense of calm and comfort made her hold back unexpected tears. The next morning, Valerie was awakened by the welcoming aroma of freshly brewed coffee. When she got up, she found Gregory in the kitchen, already prepared and cooking. There was a new pot on the stove, and breakfast was almost ready. "Good morning," he said, offering a shy smile. "I hope you don't mind. I thought it would be nice to help out a little more." Valerie nodded, feeling her emotional barriers slowly begin to give way. "Thank you," she murmured, acknowledging the gesture. "It's nice, really nice." As the day went on, Gregory's small gestures continued to chip away at Valerie's remaining skepticism. He fixed a broken toy that had been the source of frustration and tears for the children for days, and his patience with the children's endless questions was unwavering, answering each one carefully. During the afternoon, Emily had injured herself while playing outside, and her high-pitched cries immediately caught Valerie's attention. However, when she rushed to help her, she found Gregory already kneeling beside the little girl. He was gently cleaning Emily's scraped knee, his soft voice soothing her. "Look, it's all better now," Gregory said, carefully placing a bandage over the scrape. Emily sniffed, but looked up at him with her big, trusting eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Gregory," the little girl murmured. "You're welcome, Emily," he replied, patting her affectionately on the head. That night, after putting the children to bed, Valerie sat next to Gregory, still processing everything that had happened over the past few days. The unexpected help, the way he had gained the children's trust, and the lightness he had brought to a home that had, until then, been marked by exhaustion and loneliness. She knew she still had a lot to think about, but at that moment, the relief of not being completely alone was stronger than any doubts. Sitting at the kitchen table in her small apartment, Valerie felt the chaos of the day finally dissipate, giving way to a quiet tranquility. The atmosphere was calm, a welcome contrast to the rush that had marked her last few hours. "I have to admit," Valerie began in a low, measured voice, "you were a great help today. I didn't expect this. In fact, I didn't expect this at all." Gregory, sitting across from her, nodded slowly, his expression attentive and understanding. "I'm glad I could help," he replied sincerely. "You and the children are good people. It's the least I can do." Valerie looked at him, but this time more carefully, really seeing him for the first time. There was an unexpected depth in Gregory's eyes, a story he hadn't yet told, something that piqued her curiosity. But for now, she was simply grateful for his presence and the kindness he had shown her. "Thank you, Gregory," Valerie said, her voice thick with sincerity. "Maybe you could help again tomorrow?" Gregory smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I'd love to." That night, as she lay in bed, Valerie felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a glimmer of hope. The idea that with Gregory's help, maybe she could find a way to move forward, one day at a time, brought her unexpected comfort. For the first time in months, she was able to sleep soundly, wrapped in the comforting thought that she wasn't completely alone after all. The next morning, the sun filtered softly through the kitchen window as Valerie prepared breakfast. The smell of pancakes and fresh coffee filled the small apartment, creating a cozy atmosphere. Andrew and Emily were already sitting at the table, still looking sleepy, but their faces lit up when they saw the food waiting for them. Lisa, on the other hand, appeared soon after, walking slowly to the table with shuffling steps. "Good morning, Lisa," Valerie said, her gaze landing on her daughter with a hint of concern. "You don't look so good today, honey." "I'm fine, Mom," Lisa insisted, though her pale face and the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. She sat down in her chair, but barely touched her food. Valerie walked over, leaning in to kiss her daughter's forehead, and felt that she was a little warm. "You have a fever," Valerie murmured softly. "Are you sure you want to go to school today?" Lisa nodded, forcing a small smile, but her frail, tired body made it clear that something wasn't right. Even with Lisa's insistence, Valerie couldn't shake the feeling that maybe the best thing for her daughter was to rest, especially with everything they were already dealing with. "I'll be fine, Mom. We have gym today, and I don't want to miss it," Lisa insisted, trying to reassure Valerie. Although her mother's instinct screamed to keep her home, Valerie hesitated, but eventually gave in. With a soft sigh, she gave her daughter a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. "Okay, but please, if you start to feel sick, let your teacher know right away, okay?" The morning routine continued as usual. The children chattered about their plans for the day, their voices full of excitement and anticipation. As she packed their lunches and packed their backpacks, Valerie tried to shake off the growing worry that was hovering over her. She knew Lisa wasn't feeling 100%, but she didn't want to be overly protective either. After kissing each of her children goodbye, she watched them walk down the street until they were out of sight. Only then did she close the door, trying to convince herself that everything was okay. Valerie headed to work, but even as she immersed herself in her tasks, thoughts of Lisa haunted her. The spreadsheets in front of her couldn't hold her attention, while the nagging worry pulsed through her mind. "Is Lisa okay?" she asked herself over and over, her heart clenching. In the midst of this flood of thoughts, the sound of the phone broke the silence of the office. When she answered, a sense of dread washed over her as she heard the voice on the other end of the line. "Miss Lawson, this is Mrs. Parker from school. Lisa fainted during gym class. We've called an ambulance." Valerie's world seemed to stop for a moment. Her heart raced, and a lump of fear formed in her throat. "I'm on my way," was all she could say before dropping the phone and grabbing her coat in a hurry. Without thinking, she walked out the door, the sound of her heels echoing in the hallway. The walk to school was a blur of thoughts and emotions. She drove fast, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to ignore the worst-case scenarios her mind was creating. When she got to school, she parked in a hurry and ran to the gym, where the sight of the paramedics surrounding her daughter hit her like a wave of panic. Her breathing became quick and shallow, the fear becoming real. "Oh my God, what happened?" Valerie demanded, gently pushing past the students and teachers who were crowded around her. Her desperate gaze met the teacher, Mrs. Parker, who stepped forward to try to explain what had happened. Valerie's face drained of all color as she heard the teacher's words. "She just fainted, out of nowhere. We're taking her to the hospital." Without a second thought, Valerie climbed into the ambulance, holding Lisa's hand tightly, as if that would keep her daughter closer and safe. The sirens echoed through the city, a high-pitched, piercing sound, but for Valerie, it all blended with the sound of her own heart, beating frantically in her ears. She whispered comforting words to Lisa, trying to calm her daughter, even though those words seemed hollow even to her. At the hospital, a medical team quickly took over, ushering Valerie and Lisa to different areas. Valerie barely had time to process what was happening before she was taken to a waiting room. There, she began pacing back and forth, her mind filled with terrifying thoughts. The wait was suffocating, every second feeling like an eternity. It wasn't long before Gregory arrived at the hospital. His presence, though silent, brought a small comfort amidst the chaos and uncertainty. "Any news?" he asked softly, respecting the tension in the air. Valerie simply shook her head, and the tears she had been holding back began to fall. "No, but I'm so scared," she confessed, her voice almost breaking. Gregory, with a sympathetic expression, placed a firm, comforting hand on her shoulder. "She's a strong girl, Valerie. She'll get through this." The minutes dragged on like hours. Valerie continued to walk, her heart clenching with worry. Finally, a doctor approached, his face serious and professional, but with a hint of compassion in his eyes. "Mrs. Lawson, can we talk in private?" Valerie's legs felt like lead as she followed him to a small, private room. She sat down slowly, her hands shaking with anxiety. Gregory remained in the doorway, his expression reflecting the same level of concern and fear. The doctor sat across from her, his posture firm but understanding. "Lisa has a congenital heart defect," he began, choosing his words carefully. "It's a serious condition, and she needs surgery as soon as possible." The doctor's words hit Valerie like a punch. Her breath caught in her throat. "Surgery?" she repeated, almost in disbelief. "But she was fine this morning. How could this be happening?" The doctor sighed, aware of the complexity of the situation. These conditions can go unnoticed for years, with no apparent symptoms. Her collapse today was a sign of the underlying problem that, unfortunately, has now manifested itself. Valerie could barely process what he was saying, her heart heavy at the thought that something so serious had gone unnoticed for so long. Valerie's hands shook uncontrollably as she tried to process the devastating information. "Will she be okay with the surgery?" Her voice was broken, filled with anguish. The doctor, with a grave look on his face, replied, "There's a good chance, but it's crucial that we perform the surgery as soon as possible." Tears rolled silently down Valerie's face, and she, unable to hold back the avalanche of emotions, buried her face in her hands, feeling overwhelmed by fear and helplessness. Gregory, sensing her desperation, approached and silently placed his hand on her shoulder, offering the support she so desperately needed. "Thank you, doctor," he said calmly. "We need a moment." The doctor nodded and left the room, closing the door softly behind them, giving them the time they needed. Valerie looked up at Gregory, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "I can't lose her, Gregory. I just can't." Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with panic and desperation. Gregory, holding his ground, knelt beside her and gently held her hands. "You won't lose her. We'll get through this together." His words, though simple, brought a strength that Valerie didn't even know she needed at that moment. She took a deep breath, feeling a little stronger, and nodded, determined to find the courage. "I need to be strong for her," Valerie said, wiping away the tears that were still streaming down her face. Gregory helped her to her feet, supporting her as she regained her feet, both physically and emotionally. "And I'll be here for you. We'll take this one step at a time." Valerie took a deep breath, trying to find the courage she needed to face the situation. Together, they walked back to Lisa's room. As soon as she entered, Valerie's heart sank when she saw her daughter lying in the hospital bed, so small and fragile under the cold light of the sterile room. Approaching Lisa carefully, she leaned over her, gently brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "Hi, my love," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear that still gripped her. "We'll get you through this, I promise." Lisa's eyes, still tired, slowly opened, and she met her mother's gaze. "I'm scared, Mommy," the girl said in a weak voice, making Valerie's heart clench even tighter. She leaned over and gently kissed Lisa's forehead. "I know, my angel, but you're strong, and we're all here for you. You're not alone." Valerie's words carried a determination she hadn't known she had, and in that moment, all that mattered was reassuring her daughter. Later, Valerie sat at her desk, her eyes wandering to a framed photograph that sat next to her monitor. It was a candid photo of her children with Gregory, taken on a rare sunny afternoon, all of them laughing and happy. The memory of those smiles brought her some small comfort, but the weight of Lisa's recent diagnosis pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible anchor. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake off the tiredness and anxiety as she tried to focus on the spreadsheet in front of her. The office was as usual, bustling with activity and murmurs, but to Valerie, it all seemed distant, as if she were watching from the outside, disconnected from the world around her. Her eyes drifted to the clock, and it was still hours before she could return to the hospital. The thought of Lisa, alone in that hospital bed, brought a deep ache to her chest, a weight that felt unbearable. "Valerie, are you okay?" The familiar voice of a colleague interrupted Valerie's scattered thoughts. She looked up to find Jane, her office mate, watching her with obvious concern. "Yeah, I'm just a little tired," Valerie replied, trying to hide her tiredness with a forced smile. It's been a long week. Jane nodded sympathetically, her expression full of empathy. I heard about Lisa. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Valerie nodded quietly. Thanks, Jane, I appreciate it. The day dragged on, with each minute seeming to last an eternity. As the evening drew to a close, Valerie felt her anxiety growing, her hands fidgeting nervously with the frame of the photo she had shown to a few colleagues. She hoped someone would recognize her, but so far, none of them had reacted in any meaningful way. Just as she was about to pack up her things and call it a day, Ian, her boss, walked by her desk. He stopped suddenly, his eyes fixed on the framed photo Valerie had left prominently displayed. Ian's face immediately changed, his eyes widening, and he leaned closer to the table, curiosity evident in his expression. Valerie, who's that in the photo? Ian asked, his voice tinged with a surprise she hadn't expected. Valerie looked up, taken aback by his tone. It's Gregory, she replied hesitantly, trying to understand what had caused her to react. He's been helping me with the kids. Ian's face suddenly went pale, and he took a step back. This man, he looks a lot like my father, Ian said, his voice now filled with a mix of shock and disbelief. My father, who's been missing for over a year. His words hung in the air, leaving Valerie speechless for a few seconds. She held her breath, trying to process what she was hearing. Are you sure? She asked, her heart racing. Ian nodded firmly, his eyes never leaving the photograph. I'm sure. I'd recognize my father anywhere. His tone left no room for doubt. Where did you find him? Valerie's mind raced as she tried to find the right words. He saved me from an attack a while back. He's been a part of our lives ever since, but he doesn't remember much about his past. Ian straightened, a firm determination growing in his gaze. I need to see him. Now. Valerie felt a mix of anxiety and hope build in her chest. Okay, let's go. She quickly gathered her things, still in shock at what was happening. As they hurried to the car, the atmosphere felt thick with tension. The drive to the apartment was silent, but the air between them was thick with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. What could this meeting reveal? Valerie could barely contain her thoughts as she drove, wondering what Ian would learn when he saw Gregory again. As they pulled up to the apartment building, Valerie felt the weight of the situation increase. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. Was Gregory really Ian's missing father? And what would this mean for the life they had built together? As they pulled up in front of the apartment, she looked at Ian, who seemed ready for anything. He was nervous but determined. The silence in the car was palpable, and Ian's knuckles were white from gripping the dashboard, his eyes fixed straight ahead as they neared their destination. When they finally arrived, they found Gregory sitting quietly in the living room, reading a book to Andrew. The scene, so peaceful and familiar, made Valerie's chest tighten. She cleared her throat to get their attention. Gregory, this is Ian, my boss, Valerie said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions she felt. Gregory, with his usual warmth, stood and extended his hand to Ian. It's nice to meet you. But Ian, as he shook Gregory's hand, had a deep, fixed gaze, as if he were searching for answers directly in the face of the man in front of him. Dad, is that really you? His voice was choked with emotion, and his question hung in the air like a silent explosion. Gregory's face creased in confusion. Dad? I'm sorry, but I don't know you. Ian stepped back, tears beginning to form in his eyes. You disappeared over a year ago. We thought you were dead. Gregory's expression softened as he saw the pain on Ian's face, but his eyes still held uncertainty. I wish I could remember, he said sadly. But it's all blurry, like one big blur. Ian, determined to prove his identity, pulled out his phone and began to frantically scroll through his photos. He stopped at a picture of his family and handed the phone to Gregory. On the screen was a photo of Ian, his mother, and a younger version of Gregory. This is our family. Do you recognize it? Gregory stared at the photo, and for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. It looks familiar, but I'm not sure, he replied, his voice low and uncertain. Valerie, watching, felt her heart ache for both men. She knew that the confusion was only adding to Ian's pain, and Gregory's uncertainty was making the situation even more difficult. Trying to ease the tension, she said softly, "Gregory, you've been a great help to us. Maybe being around familiar faces will help your memory come back." Ian nodded quickly. "Please come home with me. My mother will be so happy to see you. Maybe it will help bring back more memories." Gregory looked at Valerie, searching for guidance in her eyes. He looked torn, as if he were on the edge of a great cliff and needed a final push. Valerie stepped forward and tenderly placed her hand on his arm. "I think it's worth a try. You deserve to know who you really are and reclaim your past." Gregory sighed deeply, as if making a monumental decision. Then, with a slight nod, he agreed. "Okay, I'll go." The drive to Ian's house was marked by an expectant silence. When they arrived, Ian's mother was already waiting at the door. The moment she saw Gregory, tears filled her eyes. She ran to him, throwing her arms around him, and sobbed with emotion. "Gregory, you're home." Her voice was filled with a relief that seemed to have waited years to be released. Gregory, however, initially stiffened at the unexpected embrace, unsure of how to react. But gradually, he relaxed, albeit hesitantly, and returned the embrace gently. Seeing this scene, Valerie stood beside Ian, watching the reunion with a mixture of hope and sadness. She knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey for Gregory, a journey of rediscovery. As they entered the house, a small sense of hope blossomed within her, not only for Gregory and his new family, but also for Lisa, for whom she longed for a future of healing and happiness. As the evening wore on, Gregory sat surrounded by Ian's family, listening to their shared stories, and slowly the gaps in his memory began to fill in. Valerie, watching from afar, felt a sense of closure begin to dawn. Gregory was finally reconnecting with a part of his past, and in doing so, it seemed to bring new hope for the future of everyone around him. He sat on the couch, immersed in the murmur of conversations around him, but his mind wandered elsewhere. Then something caught his eye. On the mantelpiece, a framed photograph stood out. It was a picture of Valerie and a man smiling warmly at the camera. Something about the photograph struck him in an unexpected way. Gregory slowly stood up and walked toward the fireplace, his eyes fixed on the picture. "Valerie," he called softly, his voice thick with a curiosity he couldn't explain. "Who is this man?" he asked, pointing to the picture. Valerie turned, her eyes widening as she realized which photo he was talking about. "That's Ben, my husband," she replied in a shaky voice. "He passed away in an accident about a year ago." Gregory's expression changed. His eyes lit up with something more than simple recognition. Ben Smith." He repeated the name, and Valerie nodded, surprised at the familiarity in his voice. "Yes, but how do you know him?" Confusion and curiosity filled her face as Gregory reached for the photo, his hand shaking, touching it gingerly. "I remember now," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "The accident." The murmur in the room suddenly died away as everyone turned their attention to Gregory. He took a deep breath, struggling to piece together the fragmented pieces of his memory. "It was a dark, rainy night," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Ben and I were driving back from a medical conference. We were talking about our families. He talked so much about you and the kids so fondly." Tears filled Valerie's eyes as each word touched her heart, bringing back memories that were still raw. Suddenly, Gregory continued, his voice shaking as he relived the moment. "The car lost control. We swerved off the road and into an embankment. The impact was brutal. I remember it clearly. Ben pushed me out of the car, telling me to run, to save myself." He paused for a moment, his voice cracking with the weight of the memory. The car exploded. Then he couldn't get out. A collective gasp filled the room, and all eyes were fixed on Gregory. Valerie clapped her hand over her mouth, unable to hold back the tears that were now streaming down her face. Ian, who had been frozen in shock, stared at Gregory with wide eyes. "He saved my life," Gregory whispered, the tears finally breaking through and streaming freely down his face. He sacrificed himself to save me. Valerie, devastated, sank onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, her body racked with the pain she had held in for so long. Gregory knelt beside her, tears streaming from his own eyes as he whispered in a broken voice, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The weight of the truth, finally revealed, enveloped them like a heavy cloud, but at the same time, a sense of understanding and connection grew between everyone there. As Gregory and Valerie cried together, the room was filled with a mixture of profound sadness and unexpected comfort, the recognition of Ben's sacrifice, which now bound their lives together in a way no one could have foreseen. "I wish I could have done more," Gregory murmured, his voice thick with sadness and regret. Ian, his own eyes brimming with tears, placed a comforting hand on Valerie's shoulder. "He was a true hero," Ian said softly, looking at Gregory with a look of respect. "And now, thanks to him, you're here with us." Valerie wiped away the tears that were still streaming down her face, looking at Gregory with a combination of deep sadness and sincere gratitude. "Ben would be happy to know that you're with us," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're part of our family now." The realization of the connection between Ben and Gregory enveloped everyone there like a warm embrace. The evening was spent sharing stories about Ben, each memory a celebration of his bravery and love. The children listened, wide-eyed, intently, their faces reflecting a mixture of pride and melancholy. The next day, Ian took on the responsibility of coordinating Lisa's surgery. He worked diligently with the hospital, ensuring that every aspect of the operation was meticulously organized. Valerie watched with a sense of relief and gratitude, knowing that her daughter was in good hands. "We'll get through this," Ian said, squeezing Valerie's hand with an encouraging smile. "Lisa will be fine." Valerie, her heart filled with hope, thanked Ian.
"Thank you, Ian.
"I don't know what we would have done without you." Gregory remained close by, offering support and comfort. His presence was a constant reminder of Ben's sacrifice, but also a symbol of the family's resilience. As the day of the surgery approached, they all came together more than ever, their bond growing stronger. On the morning of the surgery, Valerie sat by Lisa's bedside, holding her hand tightly. "You're going to be okay, sweetie," she whispered, her voice steady despite her fear. Lisa looked up, her eyes conveying a confidence that her mother needed to see. "I know, Mom. I'm not scared," Lisa replied, trying to comfort her mother. Gregory and Ian stood close by, their resolute expressions reflecting their determination that everything would work out. The doctor walked into the room, offering a reassuring smile. "We're ready to go," he said, his voice full of confidence. Valerie gently kissed Lisa's forehead, her heart aching with love and concern. "I'll be here when you wake up," she promised, her voice choked with emotion. As Lisa was wheeled into the operating room, Valerie felt a rush of conflicting emotions. She turned to Gregory and Ian, seeking strength in their presence. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice firm and determined. Gregory nodded, sharing her sense of hope and commitment to face whatever lay ahead. Valerie's eyes shone with calm determination as she looked at Gregory and Ian. Together, they waited anxiously in the waiting room, which was plunged into a tense, palpable silence. The hours passed slowly, each minute seeming to drag on for an eternity. Finally, the doctor entered the room, his calm countenance bringing immediate relief. "The surgery was a success," he announced, his tone calm and reassuring. "Lisa is going to be fine." A wave of relief and gratitude washed over Valerie. She sank into a chair, her body shaking with sobs of relief and emotion. Gregory and Ian came closer, wrapping her in a tight embrace, their own eyes filling with tears. The bond between Valerie and Ian had developed quietly, nurtured by shared moments and mutual support. On nights when they spent hours in the office, they worked side by side, the hum of computers and the rustle of papers creating a comforting routine. Ian would often bring her coffee, setting a cup down next to Valerie with a small smile. "Thank you, Ian," she would say, appreciating the simple, thoughtful gesture. One night, as they finished work, Valerie looked up to find Ian staring at her. It was nice to have someone to confide in, she admitted, her voice full of sincerity. Ian nodded, his warm gaze reflecting a shared feeling. I feel the same way, he replied. We make a good team. Over time, their conversations became more personal. They began sharing stories about their pasts, dreams, and deepest fears. Valerie found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, and Ian listened with genuine interest and deep compassion. This process of bonding helped to strengthen their bond, transforming from professional support into a solid, sincere friendship. Valerie's eyes shone with calm determination as she looked at Gregory and Ian. Together, they waited anxiously in the waiting room, which was plunged into a tense, palpable silence. The hours passed slowly, each minute seeming to drag on for an eternity. Finally, the doctor entered the room, his calm countenance bringing immediate relief. The surgery was a success, he announced, his tone calm and reassuring. Lisa is going to be fine. A wave of relief and gratitude washed over Valerie. She sank into a chair, her body shaking with sobs of relief and emotion. Gregory and Ian came closer, wrapping her in a tight embrace, their own eyes filling with tears. The bond between Valerie and Ian had developed quietly, nurtured by shared moments and mutual support. On nights when they spent hours in the office, they worked side by side, the hum of computers and the rustle of papers creating a comforting routine. Ian would often bring her coffee, setting a cup down next to Valerie with a small smile. Thank you, Ian, she would say, appreciating the simple, thoughtful gesture. One night, as they finished work, Valerie looked up to find Ian staring at her. It was nice to have someone to confide in, she admitted, her voice full of sincerity. Ian nodded, his warm gaze reflecting a shared feeling. I feel the same way, he replied. We make a good team. Over time, their conversations became more personal. They began sharing stories about their pasts, dreams, and deepest fears. Valerie found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, and Ian listened with genuine interest and deep compassion. This process of bonding helped to strengthen their bond, transforming from professional support into a solid, sincere friendship. With each moment they spent together, the connection between Ian and Valerie became more evident. On one such occasion, as the night fell gently around them, Valerie broke the silence with her soft voice. I was thinking about us, she began, as Ian turned his attention to her, his eyes full of curiosity and interest. Valerie took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before continuing. I never imagined I would find someone like you, especially after everything that's happened. You've been such a rock for me and the kids. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to get through this without your support. Ian reached out and wrapped his hand around hers, his comforting touch conveying a gentle warmth. You've brought so much light into my life too, he said sincerely. Your strength and kindness have made me realize what really matters. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the words hanging in the air, as Ian's gaze, filled with an emotional depth that seemed to touch Valerie's heart, took her breath away. Finally, Ian stood and reached into his jacket pocket. There's something I'd like to ask you, he said, his voice calm. Valerie's heart skipped a beat as Ian pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. With a careful gesture, he opened it to reveal a simple yet elegant box that seemed to hold a special promise. Under the soft moonlight, Ian presented a stunning diamond ring and, in a firm but hopeful voice, asked the question that would change their lives forever. Will you marry me? His question was filled with deep, sincere desire. Tears welled in her eyes, her heart overflowing with emotion as she looked at Ian. Standing before her was not just a partner, but a man who had become an integral part of her life and the lives of her family. Her voice cracking with happiness, she replied, Yes, I do. Yes, I will marry you. Ian, with a smile radiant with joy, placed the ring on her finger. The embrace that followed enveloped them like a warm, comforting blanket beneath the starry sky. In that magical moment, all the pain and hardship they had endured seemed to melt away, replaced by a deep sense of love and renewed hope. The next day, the family gathered together to celebrate the news. The children were excited, their faces lit up with excitement, while Gregory wore a wide, genuine smile. "We're getting engaged," Valerie announced, her voice ringing with joy. Preparations for the small, intimate wedding began immediately, and the house was buzzing with activity and anticipation. Valerie and Ian's love story, born of shared pain and mutual support, had blossomed into something truly beautiful and solid. The wedding was a moving celebration of love and new beginnings, marked by a ceremony under a canopy of flowers, surrounded by family and friends. Children played around, their laughter filling the air with infectious joy, while Gregory watched with a heart full of pride and satisfaction. When Valerie and Ian shared their first dance as husband and wife, the world around them seemed to disappear. They moved in perfect sync, each step symbolizing the promises they made to each other for the future. The reception was filled with vibrant music, lively dancing, and heartfelt toasts. The joy that filled the room was almost tangible, a clear contrast to the sadness that had previously weighed down everyone. The love and happiness that filled that moment were a testament to how much they had overcome together. As the weeks passed, life found a new rhythm of ease and routine. Valerie, now in her new home, felt completely at home. The once silent home was now full of life. The laughter of children playing in the yard echoed through the hallways, filling the house with a familiar warmth. Family dinners became a cherished ritual, always with Gregory's captivating stories and Ian's calming presence, bringing everyone together even closer. One day, while the children were playing outside, Valerie was overcome by a sudden wave of nausea. At first, she dismissed it as just tiredness or perhaps a passing illness. However, as the days passed, the discomfort persisted, awakening a silent suspicion that began to grow in her mind. Uncertain, she decided to take a pregnancy test, and as she waited for the results, her heart beat rapidly, her hands trembling with nervousness. When the test finally confirmed what she suspected, a flood of emotions took over her. She felt a mixture of panic and joy, while uncertainty about what the future would bring settled around her. Valerie found Ian in the living room, calmly reading a book. When he saw her enter, he noticed the worried expression on her face, and his eyes filled with concern. "Valerie, what happened?" he asked softly. She sat down next to him, taking his hand carefully. "Ian, I have something to tell you," she began, trying to find the right words. With a slight tremor in her voice, she finally revealed, "I'm pregnant." Ian remained silent for a brief moment, absorbing the magnitude of the news. Then, slowly, a wide, joyful smile began to form on his face. "Are we having a baby?" he asked, his voice full of emotion. Valerie, her eyes brimming with tears, nodded. "Yes, we are." With his heart overflowing with happiness, Ian pulled her into a tight hug, both of them immersed in the promise of a new phase in their lives, full of challenges, but also of deep and renewed love. Ian's embrace was warm and comforting, bringing with it a sense of security that Valerie so desperately needed at that moment. "This is wonderful news, Val. We're going to get through this together," he said firmly and tenderly. The panic that had initially consumed her slowly began to dissipate, giving way to a sense of serenity. "I was so scared, Ian," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm also so happy, so incredibly happy." Ian, with a soft smile, kissed her forehead and replied affectionately, "We've overcome so much, and this baby is a blessing, a new chance, a new chapter for our family." When it came time to tell the children, their reactions were an adorable mix of excitement and curiosity. Andrew's eyes widened in surprise. "A real baby?" he asked, trying to process the idea. Emily, on the other hand, couldn't contain her joy, clapping her hands in pure happiness. "I'm going to be a big sister again," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. Lisa, still recovering, smiled softly and said sweetly, "Daddy would be so happy for us." Lisa's comment touched Valerie's heart deeply, and she felt a powerful wave of love and gratitude for her family. They had been through so much, faced challenges that seemed insurmountable, and yet here they were, more united and resilient than ever. The months that followed were marked by a pleasant flurry of preparations and rising expectations. The family's routine settled into a happy, lively rhythm. The children spent hours in the backyard, and the sound of their laughter became a constant source of joy for everyone. Gregory, as always, remained an unwavering pillar of support. His presence not only provided stability, but also brought a sense of warmth and security. He was an active participant in every moment, his patience and love evident in every gesture. The house was full of life, with the energy and excitement of a new baby's arrival renewing everyone's spirits. Valerie knew that challenges were yet to come, but with Ian by her side and the support of her family, she felt prepared for whatever the future brought. Evenings were a special time in the house, spent around the fireplace, where the warmth of the fire reflected the warmth of the love that united the family. They gathered with peaceful smiles, sharing stories, dreams, and plans for the future, transforming that home into a true refuge from the chaos of the outside world. On a cold autumn evening, as everyone sat around the dinner table, Valerie felt a deep sense of peace spread within her. The soft crackling of the fire in the background cast a golden glow over the faces of her loved ones, creating an almost magical scene. She looked at Ian, their eyes meeting in a silent gesture of mutual understanding. He smiled at her tenderly, and Valerie, her voice soft and full of gratitude, said, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Ian nodded slightly, holding her hand affectionately. "We have, and we still have so much more to live," he replied, his voice full of promise. Valerie looked around the table, and her heart filled with excitement as she saw the children chattering excitedly, their faces lit up with youthful enthusiasm. Gregory, as always, was the center of attention, telling one of his captivating stories in that steady, calm voice that everyone loved. The future seemed full of light, full of endless possibilities and dreams yet to come true. As the evening wore on and everyone began to settle in for bed, Valerie and Ian retired to the porch, where the cool night air enveloped them like an embrace. Valerie snuggled against Ian's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, finding comfort in his closeness. "Thank you, Ian," she whispered softly, her voice almost lost in the night wind. "For everything." Ian smiled and kissed the top of her head tenderly. "We're in this together, Val, forever," he replied, his voice low and full of feeling. In that moment, all the worries that had previously weighed on Valerie's shoulders began to melt away, dissolved in the serenity of the night and the certainty of the love that bound them together. They had faced so many hardships, so many struggles, and had come out the other side stronger, more connected. The love and resilience that had sustained them through the darkest days would continue to be the strength that guided them forward. With a baby on the way and the promise of new beginnings, Valerie felt a deep sense of hope wash over her. The future was uncertain, yes, but now she knew without a doubt that they would face it all together with the same strength that had brought them this far. United as a true family, in that moment of pure happiness and love, Valerie knew that anything was possible. Dear viewers, we have reached the end of this emotional journey, and Valerie and Ian's story is a powerful reminder that even in the face of the most painful losses, love and resilience can pave the way for new beginnings. Throughout the story, we saw how a family, sustained by courage and mutual sacrifice, was able to face the most difficult times and emerge stronger and more united than ever. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it touched mine. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, and of course, subscribe to the channel to follow more inspiring stories like this one. Your support means the world to me and is what allows us to continue creating content that touches the heart and inspires the soul. Also, leave a comment below and tell me what you thought of Valerie and Ian's journey. Do you have a story of overcoming or resilience that you would like to share? I would love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, remember to always keep hope alive, value the connections that strengthen us, and remember that every end is just the beginning of something new. Take care, and see you soon.